You always knew. The official history cannot withstand even simple questions, not because you doubted, but because you saw what you were forbidden to notice. An Orthodox emperor with a Catholic symbol. Knights of Rome under the flag of Russia. Malta built just like our cities. These are not mistakes or mysteries. These are holes. So big that they could only be covered in one way, by convincing you that thinking is dangerous. The Orthodox emperor puts on a Catholic cross. A symbol appears on the coat of arms of the Russian Empire that, by all the laws of that time, should have been considered treason. Paul I, autocrat of all Russia, head of the Orthodox Church, becomes a master of a Roman Catholic order and now formally submits to the Pope. How is this even possible? They tell us about the Tsar's painful pride, about his childish fascination with chivalric romances. Historians seriously claim that an adult ruler of a vast empire made a fateful decision because of books he read in his youth. By this logic, if Pavel had been interested in stories about Native Americans, he would have declared himself the chief of a tribe and worn feathers instead of a crown. Absurd, isn't it? But look at the facts that are carefully avoided. When Napoleon captures Malta in 1798, the Knights of the Order do not flee to Rome, not under the protection of the Pope, not to the Catholic countries of the Holy Roman Empire. They rush to Orthodox Russia, to the so-called schismatics, to heretics from the point of view of the Catholic Church. The logic collapses at every step. Why do people who have sworn allegiance to Rome seek refuge with those who are officially considered apostates from the true faith? There is only one answer. The religious division appeared quite recently. Before the catastrophe at the end of the 18th century, there was a unified system, which was later torn apart and set against each other. Malta and Russia were not allies of different denominations. They were parts of a single whole. Let's go back 100 years, to the year 1698. Peter I had not yet founded Petersburg, but was already sending a delegation to Malta. The official version sounds innocent, establishing diplomatic relations, exchanging experience. But look at Sheremetev's expedition tasks. Studying the Maltese fleet, their technologies, their navigation methods. And the most interesting thing, negotiations about creating a Russian military base on the island. Think for a second. Why would an independent power create a base on foreign territory, thousands of kilometers from its own borders? This is not an alliance treaty. This is integration into an existing system. Malta in those years was not just an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. It represented a nodal point of the global navigation network, a center of sea routes connecting three parts of the world: Europe, Africa, and Asia. Sheremetev returns from the expedition with the title of Knight of Fidelity. Look at his portraits. The first award on the field marshal's chest is the Maltese Order. Then the Order of the Black Eagle, supposedly Prussian. But look closely at the shape of the cross. It is the same Maltese symbol. The Order of the White Eagle, and again, the eight-pointed cross. All the highest awards of the Russian Empire of that time bear the same symbol. These are not random coincidences. This is a single code of power spread over a vast territory. From 1770 to 1798, the Russian fleet was constantly present among the Knights of Malta. Almost 30 years of continuous interaction. This is no longer diplomacy. It is joint functioning within one structure. The Grand Master sends ambassadors to Russia to maintain friendly relations. Catherine II sends her best naval officers to Malta, supposedly for training. But here is the paradox. By that time, Russia had already defeated the Swedish fleet in the Baltic and had become a naval power. Why learn from a tiny island if you yourself control vast maritime spaces? The answer becomes obvious if you reverse the question. Malta did not teach Russia. Malta preserved knowledge that belonged to the entire system. After the catastrophe, the technology fragmented. The maritime part remained on the island, the continental part on the mainland. Officers traveled not to learn from foreigners, but to reclaim the lost heritage. The year 1789 brings even stranger events. The Maltese knight Giulio Renato arrives to help reorganize the Russian fleet. It sounds harmless until you learn the rest. This man becomes the commander of the imperial fleet in the war against Sweden. Not in peacetime, not during exercises, in a real war. A foreigner is entrusted with the lives of thousands of sailors, the fate of naval battles, strategic operations. At 26 years old, Giulio Renato, who became Julius Lida, receives the rank of the youngest general in the history of the Russian Empire. Later, he holds the position of the highest-ranking court official. His brother is a cardinal, a direct connection to Rome. The Lida family becomes a bridge between the Catholic and Orthodox worlds, which are officially supposed to be at odds. What kind of trust is needed to hand over command of the fleet to a foreigner during a war? That does not happen between allies. It is only possible within a unified management system. The Maltese were not strangers. They were bearers of knowledge that Russia lost after the catastrophe. They knew navigational secrets, understood technologies, preserved maps and methods that disappeared from the continent. Now let's look at the structure of the order itself. 8 so-called tongues: Provençal, Auvergnat, French, Italian, Aragonese, English, German, Castilian. We are told that this is the linguistic division of the knights. But doesn't the geography bother you? These languages cover all of Europe, from the Pyrenees to the Baltic. Each was responsible for its own sector, its own area of responsibility. This is not a religious organization. This is an administrative structure managing the planet's sea routes. And now a strange detail. The Cathedral of St. John in Malta was originally divided into 12 parts. 12 separate chapels, 12 zones. But there are only 8 languages. 4 sectors disappeared. They were erased from the structure after the system was dismantled. Perhaps these 4 parts belong to territories that we know as Great Tartary. After the catastrophe, they were crossed out of history, subordinated to the remaining 8, and the traces were swept away. Remember the maps. On them, Tartary was divided into parts: Moscow, Independent, Chinese. The Maltese languages are the maritime continuation of the same administrative grid. Not a monastic order, but a system of provinces on a planetary scale. When the empire collapsed, each fragment was declared a separate state. They created the illusion of national hostility between parts that previously obeyed a single center. Look at the architecture of Malta itself. Valletta, the capital of the island, is built with buildings in that very colonial style that we see from Buenos Aires to Vladivostok. Massive portals, tall windows, majestic facades with stucco. Official history claims these are traces of British colonization. But there is a nuance. Malta became a British colony only in the year 1813, and the Cathedral of St. John dates back to the year 1573. The difference is 240 years. How could buildings have been constructed in the colonial style 2.5 centuries before colonization? Historians remain silent or resort to complex explanations about the influence of the European architectural school. But the fact remains, around the world, there are buildings with identical proportions, the same decor, and similar layouts. Not variations on a theme, but as if copies from a single blueprint, slightly adapted to the local area. These are not traces of colonial expansion, but remnants of a unified construction system. Malta preserves the same architectural codes as Petersburg, Paris, or Melbourne, because all these cities were built according to the standards of one civilization. After the division, each part invented its own origin legend, but the stone reveals the truth. The technologies were unified, knowledge spread from a single center, and standards were observed everywhere. Let's look inside the Maltese temples. The ceilings rise to a height of 15 to 20 meters. The doors reach 6 to 7 meters. The windows start where the second floor ends in modern buildings. A person of average height looks like a dwarf in these spaces. The door handles are placed so high that you have to stretch to reach them. They explain this by a desire for monumentality. a wish to overwhelm the parishioner with the grandeur of the house of God. A beautiful tale, but it only works for individual cathedrals and capitals. When the same proportions are repeated in ordinary administrative buildings, in residential houses, in provincial structures all over the island, the explanation falls apart. Why make giant doors in an ordinary tenement house? For whom were these spaces designed? The answer is obvious, but they do not want to see it. These buildings were constructed for beings of different height. Archives contain mentions of people of unusual sizes who inhabited various parts of the world. Travelers described encounters with tribes whose height significantly exceeded the European standard. For a person 2.5 to 3 meters tall, a 7-meter door would be convenient. A second-floor window at a height of 4 meters from the ground would be at the correct level. A 20-meter ceiling would create a comfortable space, not pressed down from above. Malta gives us the same evidence of large-scale mismatch as continental cities. Only here, they are concentrated in a small area, impossible to miss. Every building screams, it was not designed for us. We are temporary residents in foreign spaces, adapted to what we found ready-made. Now let's go down into the cathedral itself, into the German language chapel. The walls are covered with images of double-headed eagles. Everywhere this symbol, which we are used to associating with Russia or Byzantium. The official version claims this is the coat of arms of the Holy Roman Empire. But the details do not match. The shield under the eagle is painted in the colors of the Austrian crown, and under the coat of arms itself stand figures of soldiers. Look at them closely. Luxurious mustaches, characteristic hairstyles, top knots. These are not German warriors. These are Cossacks. Why are Russian Cossacks depicted under the double-headed eagle with Austrian colors in the German language chapel? Because before the schism, Germany, Russia, and Austria did not exist in the modern sense. There were administrative zones of a single empire. The double-headed eagle served as a symbol of the entire system, not of one state. After the catastrophe, each fragment claimed part of the heritage. Russia took the eagle, Austria took the colors, Germany took the name of the language. Now everyone fights for the right to be called the legitimate heirs of what was once a single whole. But the most terrible testimony is hidden in another monument of this cathedral. The sculpture of the Grand Master Nicholas Cotiner by the outstanding Italian master Domenico Guidi, a pyramidal composition. At the top, the allegory of glory blows a golden trumpet. In the center, trophies, weapons, captured banners, the triumphal attributes of the victors. And at the base of the pyramid, on which all this grandeur rests, stand two figures, both on their knees, both chained, hands tied behind their backs. One figure, a Negro. The second, a Cossack. His distinctive facial features, mustache, and Osaletit's hairstyle give him away. Two defeated peoples at the foundation of the empire. The monument was created at the end of the 18th century, just during the final conquest of Cossack lands. This is not an allegory. This is a direct statement. The new empire is built on the bones of the old. Cossacks and Africans are placed side by side as barbarians who were broken and enslaved. Look closely at the details of the sculpture. The chains on the wrists are made with stunning precision. Each link is crafted. Every fold in the prisoner's clothing conveys submission and defeat. The sculptor did not spare realism. He needed to show not an abstract victory over evil, but a concrete triumph over specific peoples. The faces of the prisoners are turned downward, their backs bent, their bodies expressing hopelessness. And at the top of this composition is gilded glory with a trumpet, the weapon of the victors, captured banners. The vertical of power is built extremely clearly. At the bottom are the broken peoples. In the middle is military power. At the top is the divine blessing of triumph. Each element is in its place in this pyramid of oppression. Dating is critically important. The end of the 18th century is the time of mass baptism of the Cossacks, the time when they were forcibly converted to Christianity and divided into Orthodox and Catholics. Before that, the Cossacks were a military estate of Tartary, a unified structure without religious division. They were divided, set against each other, forced to serve those who enslaved them. The monument in Malta openly shows the Catholic version of the triumph. In Russia, the Orthodox version was created. But the essence is the same: the subjugation and enslavement of a people who remembered the former empire. Interestingly, this monument is not located somewhere in a corner, but in the central part of the cathedral in the Aragonese chapel. Every visitor sees it. This is not a hidden symbol, it is an open demonstration. The new rulers were not shy about showing on whose bones they built their power. Moreover, they wanted it to be remembered, so that everyone who enters the temple sees, here they are, the defeated. This is what the order is based on the knees of barbarians, shackled and subdued. The Cossack in chains is not just a symbol. It is a program implanted into the consciousness of generations. We were taught to see ourselves as underdeveloped barbarians, a developing country, not developed. Only 1,000 years of history compared to 5,000 or 6,000 of European civilization. We were made to believe that the Greeks taught us to write, that we invited Rurik because we could not govern ourselves, that all our words are borrowed because we had no language of our own. Every textbook repeats, we are the juniors, we are the students, we owe our development to Europe. But let's return to the physical traces. Malta is a rocky island, not a continent with alluvial soils. And beneath this rocky massif, entire streets with windows are hidden. Glass in frames, wooden bindings, architectural details of living quarters. These are not basements, not utility pits. These are full-fledged floors of buildings that have gone underground. On the continent, such a thing could be attributed to the cultural layer, to deposits of silt and mud. But Malta is a rock in the middle of the sea. No soil is brought here from the mainland. The rock does not accumulate from the wind. The only explanation is that the surface level itself has changed. Either the island rose from the water after a catastrophe, or the coastline radically changed, exposing what was previously higher. Let's go down into one of these buried streets. The windows here are arranged strictly in a line, as is proper in residential development. The frames have been preserved, some even with sashes. The glass has survived in places. Remnants of decorative elements above the openings are visible. These were full-fledged facades facing the street where people walked. Now this street is 2 to 3 meters below the current ground level. Measurements show the buried level stretches not for one block, but for entire districts. In some places, modern buildings stand directly above old ones, using their foundations. It turns out a layered cake of eras, where the lower layer is clearly higher quality and more technological than the upper. The old masonry is denser, stones are worked more precisely, joints are minimal. The new construction looks rougher, as if made by people who lost the skills of their predecessors. Beneath St. Paul's Cathedral in Medina are rooms called cellars. But go down there. The ceiling height reaches 4 meters. The walls are covered with limestone plaster with remnants of paintings. The quality of the masonry is no worse than the upper floors, and in places even better. These are not technical storage rooms. These are living or ceremonial halls that for some reason ended up below the modern ground level. Some of these halls have vaulted ceilings with complex geometry. The acoustics are arranged so that a whisper in one corner can be heard in the opposite corner. This is not done in basements. These are architectural solutions for significant spaces, auditoriums, meeting halls, possibly temple rooms. They are all underground, all forgotten, all declared technical basements. In the center of Valletta, there are souvenir shops with glass floors. Through them, the lower floors with windows, doors, and corridors can be seen. A whole parallel street lies beneath the feet of tourists. The shop owners use this as an attraction, but few ask the question, how did an entire street end up underground on a stone island? Guides cheerfully talk about the cultural layer and features of medieval construction, but their explanations do not withstand basic scrutiny. The cultural layer is formed from human activity over centuries. Organic matter decomposes, dust settles, garbage accumulates. On the mainland, a meter or two of soil can build up over 1,000 years. But Malta is a limestone island. There are no floodplain overflows, no deposits from mountains. Organic matter does not stay on the stone, it is washed away by rains into the sea. Where did 2 or 3 meters of fill above entire blocks come from? There is only one answer. A sharp change in the relief occurred over a short period. A catastrophe, not a gradual process. This is a marker of a global event. The end of the 18th century brought changes in sea levels across the entire planet. What was buried by mudflows on the continents manifested on the islands through shifts in shorelines. Different symptoms of one catastrophe. Malta shows us what happened to the water level when the previous system collapsed. Now look at the fortress walls of the island. Their height surpasses everything built in Russia at that time. The depth of the moats requires the excavation of millions of tons of stone. Pyotr Tolstoy, who traveled through Europe in 1697 to 1699, left records of his amazement. He writes directly, "Such a thing cannot be seen in Russia." This is not an admission of backwardness, but a confrontation with a different technological base. Count for yourself. Excavating stone to such depth without explosives would take decades of continuous work by thousands of people. The depth of some trenches reaches 20 meters, the width 30. The length of the fortifications around Valletta exceeds 5 kilometers. Multiply the average depth by the width and by the length. You get a volume of hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of extracted stone. Each cubic meter of limestone weighs approximately 2 tons. In total, millions of tons of rock that needed not just to be chipped off, but extracted, lifted up, and transported somewhere. The tools of that time, pickaxes, wedges, hammers, without steam engines, without cranes, without railways. How many man-hours are required to manually extract 1 cubic meter of limestone? An experienced stonemason under good conditions could extract 2 to 3 cubic meters per day. That means for 100,000 cubic meters, 30 to 40,000 working days are needed. Divide by the number of workers. Suppose 1,000 people worked simultaneously. It turns out to be 40 days just for excavation, not counting lifting and removal. Add time for building the walls themselves from the extracted stone. Masonry, fitting blocks, installing bastions, laying casemates. The real time frame is years, if not decades. But the fortifications were supposedly built in a few years in the 16th century. The numbers do not add up. The quality of the block fitting surpasses modern standards. In some places, polygonal masonry without mortar is visible, where the stones hold together due to the perfect geometry of the joints. The edges are fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot pass between them. The same technology is found in Peru, in Egypt, in Russia. A single method of stone processing on different continents. And everywhere the same mystery. How was this done without modern tools? Try to repeat this masonry today. Even with laser levels and diamond saws, the task will prove to be non-trivial. The stones are irregularly shaped, each unique, but all fitted to each other with an accuracy of fractions of a millimeter. This requires not just skill, but technologies that we can only guess about. Possibly softening of the stone, possibly other processing methods lost after the catastrophe. Tartaria possessed these technologies. Malta was part of the same system. After the catastrophe, the knowledge disappeared. The new rulers could not replicate what they saw, so they created a legend about years of construction. It is easier to say that thousands of workers carved the moat by hand for years than to admit we simply occupied ready-made fortifications built by those who were erased from history. And here arises the most mysterious connection. Take a globe, place 3 points, Sakhalin in the Far East, Moscow in the center of Eurasia, Malta in the Mediterranean. Draw a line. it is perfectly straight. From the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, from sea to sea, the formula of imperial power known since ancient times. But this is not just a geographical coincidence. Look at the sky. This earthly axis exactly repeats the direction of the Milky Way. Ancient civilizations always tied their empires to celestial landmarks. The Egyptians aligned the course of the Nile along the celestial river of stars. Tartaria stretched its axis from edge to edge of the inhabited world, reflecting on the earth the road of the gods in the sky. Malta is not a random island seized by a monastic order. It is the western anchor of the imperial axis. Sakhalin is the eastern anchor. Moscow is the balance point in the center. Three pillars on which the planetary scale management system rested. As above, so below, the Hermetic principle known long before Christianity. The earthly empire had to reflect the cosmic order. Therefore, Malta preserved maritime knowledge. Through it passed routes between Europe, Africa, and Asia. It served as a hub where flows of goods, information, and technologies converged. Losing control over Malta meant breaking the entire system. This is exactly what happened at the end of the 18th century. Napoleon captures the island in 1798 during the Egyptian campaign. This is not a military operation for a strategic point. It is a strike at the last node connecting the fragments of the empire. After the capture of Malta, the knights flee to Russia. Paul I takes the title of master not out of romantic fantasies. He tries to restore the broken connection, to assemble the system anew. But reintegration is impossible. Too many forces are interested in dismemberment. Pavel is eliminated in the year 1801. After his departure, all attempts at unification cease. Malta finally separates, becoming a British colony in 1813. The axis is broken forever. The new masters needed to erase the memory of unity. They created a religious schism where there was none. Malta became a Catholic outpost, Russia an Orthodox kingdom. Both were made to believe that they were enemies in faith, although their architecture, symbols, and technologies were identical. The unified signs were divided among the fragments. Each piece was given its own fabricated history. Malta was told about the ancient knightly order from the time of the Crusades. Russia was told about the calling of Rurik and the young state. Both versions hide the main thing. Once these were parts of a single administrative space. 8 Maltese tongues ruled the seas. The governorates of Tartary ruled the continents. Everything was subject to one center, one set of laws, one technology. The division was cemented through education. We were given textbooks where Europe developed over millennia, and Russia was a wild outskirts that was only recently enlightened. Each generation absorbed this lie from childhood. The patriarch calls us people without roots and culture. Scientists insist on 1,000 years of history versus Europe's 6,000. We were assigned the place of the conquered, broken, placed at the foundation of someone else's pyramid of power. This is exactly what the monument in the cathedral shows. The Cossack at the base of the pyramid is not a random detail. It is a visualization of the program. You must feel inferior. You must look up to the West from below. You must be grateful for being taught to read, given faith, allowed to enter the family of civilized peoples. And as long as you believe in your underdevelopment, you remain in a subordinate status, accepting the role of junior relatives of European civilization. But the stone does not lie. The Maltese walls remember technologies that we cannot replicate. Buried streets hold traces of a catastrophe that was concealed. The cross on the Russian coat of arms cries out about the unity that was torn apart. The axis from Sakhalin to the Mediterranean is still visible on maps for those who know how to look. The Milky Way every night reminds us of the greatness that was stolen from us. The Cossack in chains is us. But the chains hold only as long as we ourselves believe in them. Once you begin to doubt the history written for them, the structure starts to crack. Malta gives us evidence. Not theories, not assumptions. Physical traces in stone and metal. Measurements of moats that could not have been dug by hand. Buried streets on a stone island where there can be no cultural layer. Monuments openly showing conquered Cossacks at the foundation of a foreign empire. From sea to sea stretched our axis. It is time to remember this and straighten your back. Every element of this story serves one purpose: to make you feel unworthy of your past. You are told that your ancestors were primitive tribes, that they could not build, write, or think, that enlightened neighbors from the West taught them everything, that your very existence as a civilized people is the mercy of those who came with the torch of knowledge into your dark world and gave you everything. But look at the Maltese walls. They are built using the same technology as the fortifications in Russia. Look at the double-headed eagles in the German chapel. They are identical to the Russian coat of arms.
Look at the 8 languages of the order. They cover the same territory as the provinces of Tartaria on old maps.
A coincidence? Or remnants of a single system that was torn into pieces? The Maltese cross on the Russian coat of arms under Paul I is not the whim of a mad Tsar. It is an attempt to restore lost unity. Paul knew what was hidden from us. He saw documents that were later burned. He understood. Russia and Malta are not different worlds, but parts of a whole. He was removed precisely because of this knowledge. Reintegration could not be allowed. The fragments had to remain fragments, hostile and divided. After his death, Malta finally falls under British control. Russia is confined within the framework of orthodoxy, opposed to Catholicism. An artificial barrier is created where there was none. And they begin to instill in each generation: you are different, you are younger, you must learn from the older brothers in the West. But the stone remembers differently. The buried streets of Valletta remember the disaster that changed the world. The polygonal masonry of the fortress walls remembers the technologies our ancestors mastered. The monument with the Cossack in chains remembers exactly whom the new masters broke. The axis from Sakhalin to Malta, reflected in the Milky Way, remembers the scale of the empire taken from us. As long as you believe in school textbooks, you accept the imposed role. As long as you accept the status of a developing country, you agree to the role of a student, forever lagging behind the teachers. As long as you are grateful for being taught to write and given faith, you acknowledge the legend of a wild past from which you were supposedly pulled out by enlightened neighbors. But if you look at Malta with a sober eye, the picture turns upside down. We are not juniors. We are the heirs of those who built fortresses with technologies inaccessible to modern engineering. We are the descendants of those who controlled sea routes from ocean to ocean. We are a fragment of a civilization that left traces on all continents and whose memory has been attempted to be erased for several centuries. Every time you hear about 1,000 years of Russian history versus 6,000 years of European history, remember the Maltese fortresses identical to the Russian ones. Every time you are told about the backwardness and savagery of your ancestors, remember the polygonal masonry that we cannot replicate. Every time you are taught to look up to the West, remember the axis of the empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Chains on the hands of the Cossack in the Cathedral of St. John are chains on our consciousness. They can be broken only by knowledge. Malta provides this knowledge. It remains only not to close the eyes. Subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss new investigations. There are still many mysteries and discoveries ahead. We will continue to look for clues, ask uncomfortable questions, and explore what official science avoids. Because the truth is always nearby. You just need to want to see it.